Sayan, thank you for coming on, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in person. But this is great, and thank you for, it'll be a great presentation. Thank you.
Hey, Vinnie, great to see you again. It's been a while since we've spoken, but great to catch up and a great opportunity. Thank you for the opportunity for me to connect with you and your audience and talk a little bit about the technology journey that Workday is on, and we'll dive right in. What I wanted to spend some time doing for you and your audience is talk a little bit about the evolution of Workday's technology, our platform, our architecture, and of course, our applications, which is what most people think of when they think of Workday. They think of our applications in human capital management. They think of our applications in financials more and more nowadays. They may think of our planning applications or our analytics applications. But underneath all of those applications, there's really a compelling story to tell about the architecture and platform. And I like to talk about it in terms of the fact that, in my opinion, it really takes great applications to create great platforms, which is the title of this slide. Right. If you think about the great platforms that you encounter
as against someone like an Oracle, which probably says a great platform makes good applications, right?
Yeah, I think that's true.
Drive. Yeah.
I think a number of technology companies, really lead with the platform, and I think that is interesting. But it's really a technologist's view of the problem, and it's not a user or enterprise's view of the problem. When I think of the great platforms that I use, they've been proven out by applications, and so whether it's Amazon Retail that really exercised and made AWS the global platform it is today and suitable for all kinds of workloads, or Google Search and the other Google properties that have really stressed and stretched something like GCP and made it the global scale platform it is, right? It forced those platforms to evolve and to mature and made them available to a wide spectrum of use cases, wide spectrum of workloads that now really have redefined how we think about technology going forward. In the same way, and obviously on a much smaller scale than AWS or GCP, Workday's applications, our HCM applications, our analytics applications, our financials applications have forced changes in our architecture. And those architectural changes have fed into our platform, which in turn have better supported the applications we've had and enabled new applications to be built on the platform. And then as a simultaneous consideration, we're making the platform capabilities available directly to customers now through things like Workday Extend. So in the past, a few years ago, the way you interacted with Workday was solely through the applications. We have enough confidence and enough capability in our platform as a platform, and our customers need the platform directly enough that we now make that available, whether it's through integrations or things like Workday Extend, where you can build full applications, extensions to Workday applications, and meet use cases that either we haven't gotten to yet or probably will never get to because they're highly customized to your specific need.
So when you talk about your architecture changes, talk about two things. One is how have industry influences affected your architecture, and second is how has your acquisition. You've become more and more of an analytical vendor. So talk about both as you go through.
Yeah, absolutely. So start with the first one. What the process is in technology is really a process of reinvention, right? The minute you decide that what you've done is good enough, then that's when you know that you're dead. And now you might not be dead for a long time, but you've essentially have started to lapse into irrelevance. And so what it requires from us as a company, and this is not just for ourselves, but on behalf of our customers, is we constantly have to question everything we've done and identify if there's a better way of doing it. And ideally, a way to stop doing things that used to be important expertise for us. And so to give you a very esoteric example, but one that I think illustrates it is, at the start of machine learning, we had built our own deep learning capability for image recognition. And we did that because that's what you had to do in 2016. If you wanted to do AI or ML-based image recognition. You went out and you built a multi-layer network, a deep learning network, and trained it on data. And a couple of years ago, we began the process of end-of-lifing that capability, our own in-house capability, and instead directly plugging into GCP's deep learning network. Here's a deep learning network that is operating at global scale in dozens of languages with silicon backed in data centers. So GCP is on its third generation of deep learning silicon. And we saw early on that we could not keep pace with where the market was going, but we wanted to provide those capabilities to the customer. What that meant was that we had to give up something near and dear to our hearts, our own inbuilt deep learning. And of course, as technologists, we get attached to doing things ourselves, and instead move ourselves up a layer and then get out of what has now become plumbing. And recognizing in technology that today's sophisticated investment is tomorrow's ubiquitous plumbing is a primary driver behind architectural change for us. What can we stop doing and focus our resources up the value chain and deliver more value to the customer? And our unique value, of course, is understanding the intersection of customers' need with technical possibility. And there becomes a point when OCR, optical character recognition, becomes just another thing you can rent by the minute from a provider and no longer something that you invest in yourself.
That's a great, what are you trying to commoditize internally is a great way to look at it. Yeah.
And it kind of forces us to never rest on our laurels and to get very, very good about identifying where the trends, the external trends are coming, what's being commoditized and what we can stop doing, and what do we now need to start doing, right? But it also means you've got to be a little bit humble and open to the idea that somebody may be doing something better than you. And you have to hold things kind of loosely and know when the right time is to let them go and go focus on something else so that you can add more value to the customer. And for a lot of our customers, they do not have sophisticated, for example, machine learning teams. Some of our customers do. Some of our customers have incredibly capable software development, machine learning, and other technology teams. These are very, very high-end technology companies. But for a lot of our customers, the way they're going to take advantage of technology is if we can deliver it effectively to them. And it is our responsibility on their behalf to let them harness all the investment that's going on in the broader technology industry. So then I can switch and talk about acquisitions. It might be a good grounding point to talk about acquisition. And here's some of the last several acquisitions that Workday has done. And we just recently completed an acquisition of a company called Vendly that's so new that it's not on this particular slide, but happy to talk about that one as well. I think that our commitment at Workday is providing a coherent platform and solution to our customer. And that does not stop at the edge of traditional kind of the core of Workday. It has to encompass the companies we acquire. And acquisition, I think Vinnie, you've been in the industry a long time, as have I. Acquisitions are tough, right? There's a number of factors that go into whether or not you're going to look back on an acquisition years later and say that was a really good decision.
So this is a great diverse set of acquisitions, right? So Adaptive and Platform, more analytical. Zimit is more of a customer-facing proposal engine type stuff. Scout is more procurement. Pecan is more HR. How different was each architecturally to integrate?
Each of them was actually very different, and a lot of the difference has to do with when the companies were started, as much as
not so much the functional, but when they were started.
In a lot of ways. Now, there are differences. Obviously, Platfora, as what is now the core of our analytics engine, was designed from the outset as an analytics company, but they had started with really focus on on-premise. And the shift for them in coming into Workday was to rethink their architecture for the cloud. Adaptive Insights, when it was founded, very traditional three-tiered application, right? Presentation layer, business logic, database. Any one of us would be, just as familiar with that stack as we would have been 10 or 15 years ago in general principles. And, and then so integration of that into not just, the integration of Adaptive as a planning tool, as an analytics tool into the many use cases at Workday, where planning is incredibly relevant, but also in terms of the whole life cycle of customers and how they think about adding new functionality or going, taking new functionality to production.
It's a great point. Yeah.
And then you kind of look at a more modern stack. You look at a Scout or Pecan, and modern is really the wrong way to put it, but more recent. And so then you see a Pecan and a Scout, two companies that were started with the presumption of public cloud capabilities, hyperscalers, and infrastructure services at scale globally. So here you have companies that were founded knowing that all of this stuff was going to be available and never having built it. Like if you go back to the beginning of my career, like if you needed something, you built it, right? If you needed an operating system, we built it, right? I mean, to go to the very beginnings of my career. And that stack has continually gotten taller and taller and taller and taller to the point where the companies we're acquiring nowadays have been founded with that as a default principle of design, right? If you look at an Adaptive, they've got their own database technology behind the scenes, as Workday does. But you now have applications like Scout and Pecan that assume an RDS or an equivalent to RDS, relational database service, to always be there and to solve a bunch of problems like replication, backup, DR, that you would have had to, write yourself or solve yourself. And so one of the things that I think is compelling when you think about that is how do you absorb the technology that a startup that you've acquired or a company you've acquired brings without breaking the things that makes that company great, right? How do you make them not have to take a step backwards in terms of technology in order to reconcile their technology base with your technology base, right? What we'd love to have and what we really view is when we acquire a company, they pull us forward, right? Not we pull them back, right? They are where we know as a business we need to be. We need to be leveraging the capabilities that they're taking for granted, right? And
that must become an acquisition box to tick off, right? Are they going to move us forward?
Yes. I would say without exception, our number one consideration in an acquisition is cultural fit, right? We have a very strong view of our values and culture as a company, and we have found without exception that when we have high alignment in culture, that is going to be a successful acquisition, and in material terms. And when we don't, and we've had a couple of those, that has not gone as well. And so we've learned, to make that a priority. But then a strong second, Vinny, is, are they not just bringing, capability to the table, customers, markets, whatever, but are they pulling us forward, right? We had our own employee listening technical approach within Workday, right? And we looked at what Pecan was doing and said, this is where we would want to be, and they're already there, right? And so the worst thing we could do would be to acquire them and then kind of take all that away. We want them to be the thought leaders, right? They were already where we wanted to be at a time when listening to your employees is more important than ever, right? During coronavirus, during pandemic, sure, listening to your employees, that whole process that I think was inevitable got accelerated and pulled forward for every enterprise. And, Phil Chambers and the team at Pecan, I think, have an incredible view of where all this is going and where it can go. And we really want them to be the thought leaders for Workday and our customers on it.
To your point about depending on the age of the company, bringing them to modernizing them, right? Is security a big issue when you look at an acquisition? Are the older stacks much more vulnerable for protection?
Yeah, I think that's probably yes and no, right? Which is obviously an incredibly unsatisfying answer, and so I'll unpack it a little bit. When you are leveraging services that are provided more and more by a third party, on the one hand, you are shifting responsibility to the third party, AWS, GCP, whoever it is, for more and more of your security surface area. And you're reliant on their capability. And so you've got to pick your vendors very, very well, because your ability to understand what's going on in their stacks may be necessarily quite limited, right? But it does reduce your surface area. And the older stacks, you own all of that, and you own all that surface area. And that can be a big challenge, right? Especially, it's not necessarily the third-party components that you're using that introduce vulnerabilities. It's the components that those components drag in that you didn't even know were there, right? Do you even know the full software manifest of the stack that you're delivering, right? Whether that's your operating system, your application technologies, your frameworks, whatever you're using, that you still have a requirement on the vendor to understand all the software that's going into your software. So that's a way in which I think we've shifted the responsibility, generally in positive directions, but ultimately the vendor is responsible for the security, right? If I have a security problem, I can't really point to my vendors when I'm talking to my customer. And so I still have to have that ownership. One really positive thing I see in the younger startups that we have acquired, the more recent companies, is a much stronger culture of what we call shift left. So shift left is a cultural phenomenon in software development, is the idea that security is not something you think about at the end of a development process. It's something you think about from the very beginning when you're starting to design software, even before you write software. And it's not the responsibility of some security team or a QA team or a third-party security analysis team that's kind of closing the barn door after the horse has left. It's really the responsibility of development from the very onset of beginning that process. And I think that is where the industry is going, where the industry needs to go. And it is something that is strong in the culture of the companies that we've recently acquired, and is something that is critically important for Workday. So this is an opportunity, I think, Vinnie, to look a little bit at where Workday's core technology base is today. And I think that, a little bit of an eye chart of a slide, but really one of the main takeaways, for you is, and everyone watching this, is the stack that Workday started with 15 years ago is not what we have today. Literally no line of code from 15 years ago still exists. Not one. The whole thing has been rewritten. Parts of it have been rewritten multiple times. Today, we have a highly scalable platform that can support millions of employees on a single instance of Workday, right? So you don't have to make a decision about how do I map my environment so that, my vendor can scale. Like, we can handle your workload. If you're the largest employer in the world, we can handle your workload, right? And we have elastic capability, horizontally scaling elastic capability, because you have business cycles, right? You do payroll on particular days and times. You run specific reports at times during the month or during the fiscal year. And so you do not have constant consumption of resources. You have highly fluctuating consumption of resource. And for a lot of our vendors, those resource usages changed radically through the year or during coronavirus, or other external effects can drive your operations. And so what you really need from your vendor is to have elastic capability to scale up and scale down as you need capacity to handle peak workload, not just baseline workload. And so what you see in Workday today is a set of capabilities that are horizontal, that can elastically scale up and scale down to handle different kinds of workload. And you can also see specialization in those compute engines, right? If we went back 15 years ago, we would see a lot of general compute engines in the Workday stack. Today, you see a lot of highly specialized compute engines, and we send the right workload to the right engine. If you've got an analytics workload, it will go to the Prism technology that came in through the Platforma acquisition, right? That is designed for that type of workload and optimized for that workload. We have the OMS transaction service in the middle of this diagram that handles our high performance transaction workloads. We've got integration servers that handle the ins and outs as you connect Workday to systems outside of Workday, right? You have ML workloads that move into our ML environment that have a different kind of usage rate, memory consumption, CPU usage than these other workloads. And we can optimize for all of those. And I think that's really the dramatic difference, that if you time traveled back 15 years and showed this slide to architects at Workday, what they would be surprised by is the specialization and the elasticity and the horizontal scale that modern Workday has.
The granular engines you have.
That's correct.
Different. That's different from the competition too, right? I mean,
yeah.
That's the level of detail you're describing.
The competition has a really good hammer. It's a very big hammer, and they use it every chance they get. It's a very good hammer. Sometimes that hammer runs on specialized hardware. Sometimes that hammer, right, is in the cloud. Sometimes that hammer is on premise. It's a great hammer, right? But it's a hammer. And our belief is that we can get very good nowadays at specialization of workload. And we've seen that in other areas in our industry, right? The age when you would do machine learning processing at a hardware level on standard CPUs from Intel or AMD is essentially over. The industry realized that there was these devices, these GPUs that had been developed primarily for gaming, and realized that, hey, these are really, really interesting because of the way they tackle the processing problem. And we can leverage that capability, essentially parallel processing versus serial processing, parallel at scale. And those kinds of problems are the kinds of problems we have in deep learning networks or other kinds of workloads within the ML AI capability. And of course, modern NVIDIA is as much a victory of the AI ML world as it is a victory of the gaming world, right? Is the recognition that you should have specialized CPUs, not just general purpose CPUs to solve the problem. At a different scale, that's what we're talking about here, is having specialized processors for the kind of workload you have, optimized for that workload to give you the right level of performance for the problem you have.
Sayan, I don't know how many people know that, so I'm glad you brought that out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything else?
Well, I think that maybe the capstone on this, or the ending on it, Vinny, is really that it's a process. The process, it's a journey. The process and journey we're on is one that is going to continue in the future. And as I said, the requirement on a technology vendor, a software vendor in the modern age, is to constantly reinvent yourself. When one of our customers decides to baseline and run their business on Workday. And when you think about HCM and you think about financials and our other applications, really you're running your business on Workday. We have a responsibility not just to that customer today, we have a responsibility to that customer 5 years from now, 6 years from now, 7 years from now. We hope that those customers will be with us even longer than that they'll be happy with the products and services we provide, and that they will stay with us for a very long time. And our responsibility is to reinvent ourselves so that the platform that they have built their enterprise around stays relevant and stays capable of meeting challenges that you and I don't know about yet, right?
Sayan, thank you for that presentation. Really
You're very welcome.